Conservation officers' districts vary throughout the state, and they vary in the wildlife that's present in those districts and also the population that's there. And those two things can really affect what that officer performs daily, what kind of responsibilities he has.
So with each officer covering about 350 square miles, we need to be mobile and we need to be able to move to respond to calls. And one way that we can do that is having an office in our vehicle. We have internet capabilities in here. We have radios, mobile radios, we have portable radios, so that we can receive information and respond to calls in a timely manner. When you have that much area, sometimes driving from one location to the other to respond to a call is an issue. So we want to be able to respond and receive that information as soon as possible. And having these in-vehicle capabilities allows officers to do that.
Pennsylvania Game Commission as an agency is responsible for managing over 480 species of birds and mammals in Pennsylvania. As conservation officers, our duties to achieve the agency's mission would be law enforcement. That's really the conserve and protect portion of that 480 species that we cover. The other stuff that we would do is educational opportunities like hunter ed, providing an opportunity for kids to learn how to be safe and lawful hunters. In the law enforcement aspect of what we do, patrol state game lands and manage state property, now 1.5 million acres of state game lands. And we also have public shooting ranges that officers typically patrol and enforce our regulations on. In addition to that, there's wildlife management. That's a huge part of an officer's responsibility. And a lot of times that involves bears, whether that be nuisance bears or trapping for research to figure out how to best manage the population. In addition to that, there's nuisance wildlife that we typically get called to as an officer. Sometimes public safety is an issue there too, because this wildlife can carry diseases that could harm people. So we have that human-wildlife interaction and that conflict that we want to keep to a minimum, but not to the detriment of the wildlife.
From usually about the mid-March till almost up into bear season, December, we get quite a few bear complaints from people either leaving their garbage out, the bears get into it, bird feeders, usually sometimes damage to septic mounds or trying to get in sheds where they store bird seed or pet food. People leave pet food out. Most of our problems, bear problems, can be resolved by getting rid of the food source. That's what we try and do first, is have the people get rid of the food source, because trapping the bears isn't always a solution. Many times, no matter how far you move them, they'll come back. Or if they don't come back, another bear will come in and take their place. So trying to resolve the food problem is number one. If that doesn't work, then we'll set the trap. But many times if we set the trap, it's because they're doing damage to something. Septic mounds, sheds, siding, stuff like that. Yes, in the summer, pretty much a minimum of 2 to 3 hours a day, minimum. Every day is spent either checking bear traps, relocating bear traps, processing bears, tagging them, or just getting on the phone and calling people back on bear complaints. Some days it's your whole day.
We're responding to an injured eagle in the Shippensburg area. It appears to be a mature bald eagle. The caller stated that it had been on the edge of her property in the yard since last night. We did have a pretty substantial amount of weather as far as consistent rain. Right now, from the look of it, it does appear to be fairly alert. Nothing looks to be overtly wrong with it, but the fact that it hasn't been moving or very flighty at this point was cause for concern.
It does seem alert, but at the same time there's a twitching or seizing that it seems to have with the feed. And I was able to get within about 1 or 2 feet of it, and it really didn't make any attempt to kind of evade or escape. So what we're going to do at this time is collect it up and then secure it, and then try to get it to a rehabilitator that can assess it and evaluate it a little more in detail, and then make a determination what to do for treatment, and then potentially further rehabilitation if possible.
So one of the areas that we frequently patrol, and really busy all year round, but a lot of times during the summer, even from spring until fall, the public shooting range on Game Lands 242. We have Game Lands shooting ranges located all across the state. What we had this evening was several minor violations. When Officer Huser and I got up there, it was actually after sunset, so the range had closed. The latest we had an individual shooting this evening was 17 minutes past sunset. So that's relatively close to when the range closed. We checked 3 individuals up there. Of the 3 individuals, one of them had a valid hunting license. We checked that. We were able to check that on our computer system. He didn't have the hunting license with him. So all in all, we had 2 very minor violations. So what we decided to do was issue warnings for the violations this evening. If there would have been more, or maybe if the individuals would have had prior warnings or other violations that would in fact let us know that they knew what the regulations were, then the outcome would have been a little bit different. But all in all, when we're looking for voluntary compliance, I believe that was the appropriate thing to do for this evening. But we'll continue to check the range. Occasionally what we do is set up a range law enforcement detail, and that's when we focus specifically on range regulations, and we'll spend quite a few hours there just making sure people are in compliance, people are safe. We've had incidents at the range from stolen firearms to people shooting themselves and injuring themselves, so we don't want that kind of thing to happen. That's why we like to have a presence there.
As an agency, we typically are faced with new challenges every year. While we've had great successes in this state with reintroduction of species like the bald eagle, like the fisher in the state, and various other wildlife species, we're now challenged with new diseases and new illnesses that could really affect our wildlife populations if we allow them to. And what I mean by diseases and new challenges, for an example, would be chronic wasting disease. So chronic wasting disease has been found in the wild population, the free-ranging deer in Pennsylvania, and that's a huge concern to us as an agency and should be to sportsmen as well. This is a disease that's a prion, it's a mutated protein, and that means that it's very hard to get rid of. And at this time, we don't have a test for live animals, so it's a post-mortem test. The animal must be dead before we can do an effective test and determine if it did have CWD. Right now we have it in a limited portion in the state, but if it were to spread, it could have huge impacts on our wildlife, specifically our cervid species, our deer and elk in Pennsylvania. When I think about some of the things that drew me to being a conservation officer, I think about how I grew up and kind of my background and the things that I was interested in, not only in high school but also in college. I just loved being in the outdoors, and I couldn't see myself doing an office job or anything that was really inside on an 8-hour day. What I like about the job is just the variety. I like the challenges that come with it, because every single day you're just not sure what you may be called upon to do. And I really enjoy that, because I can tell you in 7 years, I haven't had any day that's been exactly the same, and probably not even close to being the same. And whether I knew that at first, when I was attracted to the position, probably not, but now that I'm in it, I can say that's one of the most enjoyable and exciting things about the job.